where we want to make certain that they are allowed and have the resources.
We interrupt regular programming. I'm Richard Louie at MSNBC headquarters in New York City for just a little bit. Breaking news coming out of France. As you know, the election has been watched by us here in the United States throughout recent weeks. We have breaking news in terms of who will be the next president. Emmanuel Macron is the projection by French media. Chris Dickey, the Daily Beast World News editor, has been following along with us this election on an evening there. The polls just closing and the projections are out. Chris, the surprising point might be the gap here by which Macron has won. This as we look at some of the celebrations. In this case, Marine Le Pen just taking to the microphones. What was she saying there as well, Chris?
Le Pen was conceding defeat. Look, I think something that you need to understand is that this is not just projections based on exit polls. These are the projections of the Interior Ministry and the Prime Minister of the country. They made the announcement based on a sampling of actual balloting across the country. There isn't really any question mark here except for maybe fractions of percentage points. Emmanuel Macron has won by 65% of the vote, a massive victory over Marine Le Pen. Her party did do much better than it's ever done in the past, but she is going to have a very difficult time establishing herself as the opposition, and he is going to have a much easier time forming a government. This is a huge setback for the internationalist ideas of people like Steve Bannon around President Trump, with the idea that they were going to take apart Europe, take apart NATO, and basically create a situation that, among other people, Vladimir Putin of Russia thought would be just great if Marine Le Pen won. Well, she didn't win. Emmanuel Macron has won, and Le Pen is now, at least this candidacy of Le Pen, is history.
Chris, what is next now that we have the results here right after the 8 p.m. hour locally? What's next in the process?
Well, what's going to happen now is that within a week, the current president, François Hollande, will move out of the Élysée Palace, and Emmanuel Macron will move in. He will appoint an interim government because we are looking at legislative elections just a month away, a two-phase election in the middle of June. And he will be trying to organize his movement into a party that can gain at least a substantial presence in that assembly, if not indeed a majority. He's also going to be trying to draw on both the traditional centrist conservatives and the traditional centrist part of the Socialist Party. Already, the current Minister of Defense in the Socialist government is clearly a Macron man and on his side. We expect that we'll see other people drawn to him. He will try to form a government after those legislative elections that can last through some pretty considerable reforms that he has in mind. Certainly nothing like Marine Le Pen had in mind, withdrawing from Europe and withdrawing from the euro and weakening NATO, but something rather more like the traditional liberal economists have believed would work better in France, the liberalization of the labor laws, things like that. He's going to work very closely with NATO, very closely with the European Union. I think that Theresa May in England is going to have a much harder time negotiating a Brexit deal with the European Union now, because they will hold together, which they would not have done if Le Pen had been elected. So a lot is at stake here. A lot has yet to be decided, but the one thing that has been decided is who the next president of France will be, and that is Emmanuel Macron, a man of 39 years old, who has never held elective office before, but is considered one of the brightest lights in the political firmament here.
One of the brightest lights, Chris, and when we see that he has won by 30 percentage points here, the estimates of the polls before the 48-hour blackout, as you have been following too, in the 20s, what does this say potentially about who came out to vote? There's a question whether people would show up, right, in the right numbers, in the same quantities that they have in recent elections. What does that gap say about who Macron is and who is supporting him?
Well, it certainly says a lot of people did not want Le Pen. I think that in the first round we saw that some 41% of Macron's voters, when analyses were done, actually had voted for him because they just didn't want to vote for anybody else. They didn't necessarily support him and like him. I think he doesn't have the kind of militant following that some politicians have had in this country, including Le Pen, although her group is much smaller. I think he's going to have to win over the electorate here in a positive sense. He's going to have to convince people that they have a reason to support him and his policies, not just to vote against someone like Marine Le Pen, who essentially comes from a background that people regard as crypto-fascist, quasi-Nazi.
Her concession speech, we were watching a little bit of it before we broke in to announce the results here. Again, if you're just joining us, that France has elected a new president, that is Emmanuel Macron, the centrist in the race, in this runoff with Marine Le Pen. She did congratulate Macron. She did not speak very long. This concession speech happened maybe in the last 10 minutes. Were you able to glean anything else from what she said in her concession speech, Chris?
No, I really was not, but I don't expect that she was very gracious. These are bitter enemies, and she ran a very bitter campaign. If you saw the debate a few days ago, it was really deeply nasty. She spent the entire 2.5 hours trying to get a rise out of Macron, personally insulting him many times, and just generally being a fairly vile person, if I may say.
Do you expect them to come together in any way moving forward then, now that Macron has won? Do you expect them to work together to address those voters, the 35% of those who did vote in today's election?
I think the 35% who voted for Le Pen are angry, fearful, and nostalgic. And I think he has to do something to address that anger and that fear. He has to address the anger about unemployment in this country, about a sense of economic stagnation, and he has to address the fear that's based partly on immigration, partly on the fear of terrorism. This country has suffered awful terrorist attacks over the last 2 years. Those things he needs to address. Will he work with her to address those? No, I don't think so. I think he'll try and win over her supporters by addressing them in other ways. I don't see any possibility of cooperation between Le Pen herself or her National Front Party and Emmanuel Macron and his En Marche movement.
You know, Chris, one of the thematics that you've discussed in your reporting for us here on MSNBC and NBC News is these two candidates, for some in the middle, felt these are neither of the two people that I would like to vote for. One who holds extreme views is the criticism. The other, who has never held an office, is a wealthy individual, does not match who I am as well. The result of that concern, at least pre-election, pre the announcement in the last 15 minutes of the winner, was they wouldn't show up. Right now we're seeing at least early numbers of 77% participation. In the last round it was 80%. Put that in context for us.
Well, I think that there are several things that lowered the participation today. The thing that everybody was worried about is that people would be so disgusted with both candidates, they just wouldn't show up, and you'd really have very high abstention rates or blank ballots. Something on the order of 30% or more. That's not the case. The abstention rate that we've seen so far as the numbers are concerned, is relatively close to what we've seen in the past. I think in 2012, the abstention rate was something a little less than 20%. Now it's a little bit more than 23%. That's not a huge difference. And I think a lot of people will be relieved. You know, ultimately, the French feel that it's their civic responsibility to vote. And a lot of people raise questions. And in conversation with people, you'd hear them say, oh, I'm going to vote for Le Pen, or I'm going to go away for the long weekend, I'm not coming back, or I'll abstain, or one thing or another. But in the end, that's not what they did. They voted, and they gave Macron a resounding victory.
What's the thought? You brought this up earlier here. The Trump effect, the Trump hangover, depending on which side of the aisle you sit on, and how that affected potentially the voters in France thinking, we have to go out and vote. We look across the pond, we see what happened in the United States for those who are moderate or more liberal and stayed at home, but thinking, I need to go out and vote because I saw what happened in the United States. How much might have that been part of the discussion there?
Oh, I think it was a big part of the discussion. I think to some extent, even Marine Le Pen was always uncomfortable with identifying with Trump. I remember being at press conferences and events with her where people would say, you know, you're the Trump of France. And she'd say, no, I've been around a lot longer than Trump. She didn't really like that. She would say that Trump had kind of opened the door for her, that he had sort of legitimized her. But I think looking at his record over the first 100 days or so, I don't think there was a lot of feeling that Trump's presidency was good news for Marine Le Pen.
Interesting.
And there is a strong feeling that this is an end to the tidal wave of populism and nativism, at least an end for now, to that tidal wave that brought us Brexit and Trump.
Chris, I just heard a horn or two. We're also watching some pictures we believe to be preparation for a speech by Macron. Also, there, I think it's close to the Louvre in the plaza there, flags being waved. What's the sense of energy? I know it's 8 o'clock on a Sunday evening, but they have just elected a new president in the country. What's the energy level just around you?
Well, I think it's building. I mean, certainly people have been driving by, honking their horns. We're not very close right here to the place where Macron's victory celebration will be held, which is over at the Louvre. And actually, there was a scare over at the Louvre earlier today. It looked like there might be some kind of terrorist plot that was involved there. But yes, I would say the energy level is very high. As I look at the social media and the tweets and the Facebook posts that are going up, people are breathing a huge sigh of relief.
And they're waving flags to do that. I want to bring in a colleague of ours, Chris, NBC's Matt Bradley, who has been reporting on the French election, the lead-up, and now the results. What are the numbers you are hearing right now, Matt? We were getting information from French media, which NBC did not independently confirm as of yet, 65-35. What do we know?
Those are the numbers, as my colleague just said. I mean, this is kind of the definitive final response. And the numbers, they could change, they could waver just a little bit, but this really is more or less the final announcement. So we're seeing what looks like a pretty clear, verging on a massive repudiation of Le Pen and her supporters and their sort of anti-globalist agenda that she's been touting, and that a lot of her allies, not just in the United States, not just Trump, but many throughout Europe. This is something that so many that the Steve Bannons of the world had said that there would be a wave of populist sentiment that would follow Trump's election in the United States. That just simply hasn't happened. It looked like there was a glimmer of that with Brexit before the U.S. election. But then when Geert Wilders, when he failed to get the prime ministership in the Netherlands, and then we saw before that Norbert Hofer in Austria, he did not win the presidency, even though he came within striking distance of the presidency there. And now here with Marine Le Pen's failure in France, we're not seeing quite the end of this wave. It doesn't look as though it's entirely crashed here on French shores. We still have elections in Germany in September, and there's some elections in Italy, and of course the elections where Theresa May called in June. But it seems as though, for the most part, this was the decisive vote. This was what the world was looking for, to see if Marine Le Pen was able to capture the momentum from Brexit and Trump and carry this banner of populism throughout the world. It looks as though she hasn't been able to do that. Not only has she not been able to do that, she was dealt with a decisive blow, a decisive repudiation, saying that voters here in France and probably throughout Europe would no longer accept that kind of talk, that kind of anti-immigrant hostility, this kind of dismantling of the European Union and other major global institutions. So this is really a big day, not just for France, but for Europe and really indeed the world, Richard.
We're also watching pictures for our viewers of the celebration of Emmanuel Macron, as well as his supporters there at the Louvre and the plaza there in front of the museum. And the singers, the performers have just begun. Perhaps we will see Emmanuel Macron come up in minutes, and if he does, of course, we'll go straight to that. We have a rough translation of Marine Le Pen, who lost, only garnering 35% of the vote, more or less. In that rough translation to both you, Matt, and Chris here, this is a head nod to what you were just saying, Matt. She's saying that she will now organize a new sphere, patriots versus globalists in favor of globalization. This has given a choice to the voters. She is saying thank you to the 16 million people that gave her vote, that she did call Macron to congratulate him. But the point here, as she spent the majority of her concession speech here, which was not very long, was to underline what she believes will be a continued battle against globalization and looking at new social models in what she calls a cacophony of new challenges. What might be those next steps? Matt, you first, and then to Chris.
Well, the obvious next step is going to be the parliamentary elections. And so far, Emmanuel Macron has convened his own party. It's called En Marche. Now, he cobbled together this party just last year. Not only is Emmanuel Macron never held elected office in his life, but he's the head of a new party. He's going to be the youngest president, I believe the youngest president, at least in several generations, probably in French history. And now he has his own nascent political party that's going to be vying in a massive legislature for seats. Now, already polls have shown that his En Marche party will probably do quite well. But Marine Le Pen is going to be putting up quite a fight. As you just mentioned from that speech, and as my colleague Chris Dickey here just mentioned, she's not going to be looking to reconcile herself with the Emmanuel Macrons of the world or the Barack Obamas of the world. She is going to be moving back into position, taking up a fighting posture, and moving on from there, because she sees this as a movement that is global, like I just described, in the same way that Steve Bannon sees this as a wave of populism that's moving across the world. So she's going to be using not just these legislative elections that are coming up, but she's also going to be reaching out to so many of these other far-right populist political parties. You know, Richard, one of the really unusual things about this movement is that they're nationalists, but they also have an international perspective. It seems like something of a contradiction. But even in Koblenz, Germany last year, a lot of these politicians who I just mentioned, Geert Wilders from the Netherlands, Norbert Hofer from Austria, Frauke Petry from Germany, and Le Pen, they were all together, all meeting and discussing how to take their sort of nationalist, sort of chauvinistic show on the road, if you will, and take it to an international audience. So it's a bit of a contradiction. How do you say, you know, France for the French, Britain for the British, right, Germany for the Germans, and then reach across borders and shake hands with your colleagues who are saying, you know, essentially the opposite things. So they're going to be doing that still, and probably with a renewed vigor after this, as I mentioned, massive repudiation.
Yeah, in business terms, it would be a franchise model. In this case, we're talking about politics. Yes. So politically, franchising a nationalist movement. Chris, reflect on that and that idea of, as we look forward, a very important election upcoming in Germany. Angela Merkel, now seen, as we saw in pictures with Donald Trump, being the lead globalist, if you will, not necessarily a title that she aspired to or that anybody thought she was going to have to take on, but now when we look at the EU, she holds that role as also the most experienced.
Well, you know, look, first of all, I think it's important to understand that a lot of those movements that we've just been talking about are actually much more comfortable as opposition movements than they are as governing powers. Geert Wilders in the Netherlands had a big chance to play a key role in the government before, and he really wasn't very successful at it, because what he really wants to do is sit on the outside and spit in, as it were, to the tent. He's not one who wants to be in the tent. And the same thing I think we'll see apply with a lot of these different parties. I don't think any of them are going to win power. I don't think the AfD, Frauke Petry's, what used to be Frauke Petry's party in Germany, has really a prayer in hell of making a major dent in the elections there in September. And here, I think that Marine Le Pen's own party is likely to get to be badly battered from within. I think her niece is basically barking at her heels. Her father hates her, and he founded the party. I think it's going to be pretty divisive, especially since she didn't even make it to 40%, which is what had been projected in the polls. So I think we're going to see a lot of animosity, a lot of aggressive politicking, but I don't think we're going to see any of these parties taking power anytime soon.
You know what we might see if the United States and what is happening today post-Donald Trump win is potentially within these parties and these subsegments and groups is freelancing, where they'll move off of their subgroup, as we have seen here in the United States, and potentially more derivations of the energies as we've looked at the nationalist economic movements in Europe. I want to bring into our conversation here, Matt and Chris, Guy Forman, who's a publisher of France Amerique, and I want to bring you in on this, Guy. Are the voters, the 16 million that Marine Le Pen just addressed moments ago, that's voted for her, Are they durable enough? Are they sustainable enough? Are they energetic enough to sustain what she would like to do in her concession speech, and as to continue in a strong way with this anti-globalist movement that she has very clearly articulated in her concession speech?
Well, regretfully, my answer will be yes. And, you know, the disruption today in the French election, that traditionally in France you have the right versus the left, right? And today you have the people in favor, you have the clear winner is in favor of free trade, globalization, and Europe is a clear-cut winner. But the opposition is very strong, and the opposition now is not the left or the right. The opposition is the populist, nativist party. It is a party, and they are not going to disappear. And for the first time in French history, they reach more than 1/3 of the vote. So this is new. This is extremely significant. And if Macron, as a president, doesn't prove he's able to deliver, well, Madame Le Pen party will grow and grow, and could seize power someday.
What is the style expected coming from Emmanuel Macron?
Well, he will be a low-key president, and we like that because we are a little bit exhausted. You know, with charismatic presidents, we never deliver. So he'll be low-key, but he's expected to be efficient, bringing dynamism to the French economy and the French job market. But this will be extremely difficult to achieve because there are so much, you know, built-in interest and so many people, mostly in the public sector, who are opposed to free market and a free labor market, that Macron will have a hard time and winning a majority in parliament first, and then achieving his reforms. And therefore, I mean, if he doesn't deliver, I mean, the National Front is still there, and I think it's now an alternative. It's very different from the Netherlands or Germany. I think the National Front, regretfully, is an alternative.
I know at the moment, I believe, Guy, you're in the United States. However, you do hold residence in France as well.
Yes.
The question I have for you is to make a comparison or contrast here of the divisions in France, the nationalist movement there that we're looking at from Marine Le Pen and her supporters, and then the centrist, those who voted for the centrist candidate in France and his supporters, excuse me,
yes.
The candidate and his supporters. How far or how divisive is the relationship right now? And I'd like you to use the benchmark of the United States, based on our election in November of 2016 and the way we've been talking about it here. Make that comparison for us.
Well, first, Madame Le Pen is no Donald Trump. There is a huge distinction. Donald Trump is, of course, pro-business, to say the least. And Madame Le Pen is much more in the French traditions. She's strongly against the private sector, against free trade. She's anti-business. So that's a huge difference between Trump and Madame Le Pen. On the other hand, she's a populist like Trump.
But Guy, talk about the electorate. That's what I want you to focus on. The divisiveness and the relationship in the electorate, the different camps.
You're right. This deserves to be compared because the electorate is very similar. And the people who voted for Trump and the people who voted for Le Pen, they look alike. I mean, they are disenfranchised people, and they people who are rather poor. And when you look at the map of the electorate of Trump and the electorate of Madame Le Pen, they are very similar. You have a strong geographical distinction. I mean, the cities are rather liberal in the United States, liberal in France, and, you know, the decaying part of France and the rural areas and the Rust Belt in France, like in the United States, they supported Trump in the U.S. and they support Le Pen in France, which shows the similarities of the electorate and similarities of the problem, that people who are negatively impacted by globalization, they are voting now for populist nativist parties because nobody's taking care of them and nobody's offering a solution to them.
So similar is what you're saying. Guy, stand by. I want to bring in Steve Clemons, editor-at-large for The Atlantic, also an MSNBC contributor. Steve, the conversations had on the lead up to this election from those who were watching what is happening in France and in Europe and the United States, and that discussion that you and I have had over the last couple of months, this transatlantic dynamic that exists between the United States and important countries like France and all in the EU here. The concern was what would happen in this election. Would this idea of the Trump effect, the Trump dynamic, now be resounding across Europe? France was a key benchmark in the conversations for just about everybody that you were speaking with in recent time and you were reflecting on. Have they cleared the hurdle, those who are concerned that it would be happening, this nationalist economic movement, this nationalist movement that started in the United States in recent years, I should say, continuing into Europe? Have they cleared that hurdle, those who are worried about it, because we now see the centrist winning?
I think that they've stepped in the right direction. You and I have talked before about the deep frustration in transatlantic relations, but as Europe was hit with more and more problems, terrorism, refugees, economic malaise, and so on, to see the French people pick Macron, I think is a sign of some confidence that, you know, not all the walls are being torn down, and this is good. The other really interesting thing about Macron is he's now behind Justin Trudeau, the second Generation X leader of a major world power who's coming forward. So we're really seeing also a generational transition and a kind of confidence, if you will, in the decision-making and experience of a very different generation of people. It's going to be interesting to see how Donald Trump deals with that. So I think that, you know, given the pessimism and cynicism that we've seen building in Europe, this is heartening.
Yeah, and heartening, I think, for those who would like less uncertainty, right? And as we look towards Germany being the next major election in Europe and Angela Merkel being that important leader that is, for the most part, very much supported by most of those in the EU by great margins in terms of being seen as a leader that understands the transatlantic relationship. What does this mean for her? It wasn't necessarily a concern, at least by most discussions, that she would be unable to win again. But where does this put
her decision to host nearly 1 million refugees was highly controversial, and I think that her situation was wobbly. It has begun her, you know, she's begun to demonstrate in various state elections that the center was holding inside Germany, and that as we look forward to the September elections, what just happened in France may give her just a bit more breeze at her back, that they're able to kind of hold the major parties and leadership inside Germany. And it didn't look like that a year ago. It looked really, you know, kind of dangerous, that you saw whiffs of 1930s Europe coming back into the fore in politics all across the various European capitals. And so I think that Merkel gets a boost from this. I think Europe as a whole gets a boost from this. I think Brexit and Donald Trump were two big gut punches to the solvency of Europe, and Macron's election today knocks that back. I think it gives Merkel a chance to continue to demonstrate her leadership, not only in Germany, but in Europe, if she's able to hold it together for the September election. But, you know, from my position of being a kind of internationalist, a globalist, a believer in the importance of transatlantic relations, seeing Macron beat back, I think, one of the most potent forces in a kind of national jingoistic party that we saw in Marine Le Pen, I think is very, very important.
For those who are just joining us here at MSNBC, the breaking news at this hour, it's a quarter till 3 p.m. Eastern, is that there's a new president for France. The results coming out of France, it is 65% for Emmanuel Macron, who is the centrist. Marine Le Pen coming in at 35%. This winning margin of 30 percentage points, more or less, is greater than what collections of polls were showing on the lead up to today's vote. 8:44 p.m. local time on the left-hand side of your screen. you can probably guess you are watching Macron supporters, the centrist candidate supporters, celebrating outside the Louvre there, the museum, on the plaza. There was a performer a little bit earlier, and we do expect Emmanuel Macron to come up for a victory speech. His opponent, Marine Le Pen, earlier, about 35 minutes ago, coming to the microphones at her campaign headquarters, saying that she had called Macron, had conceded, but then continued on in her short message to say she is more invigorated, more enlivened to continue her anti-globalization campaign, and she will look to do that going forward in the spirit of the 16 million people, she said, that voted for her. So if you're just joining us, that is the breaking news this hour here on MSNBC. Chris Dickey, Matt Bradley still with me. Matt Bradley, the numbers here, the 30 percentage points here, greater than what the estimates were. What does that say about the liberal base or the centrist base and the turnout altogether?
Well, it does say that, it was a slight, I was just speaking with Chris just now, that it was slightly more than the polls predicted, and the polls have been pretty much on point, especially in the first round about 2 weeks ago. Now, what this says was that Marine Le Pen wasn't able to pull off a very clever gambit that she and others in her camp had hoped to pull off. She thought that she might be able to win votes from the far left. So if you think about it in terms of the political wings, less as a straight line and more of a circle, Marine Le Pen had thought that maybe she'd go all the way around the right side and gather from the 20% who had voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And he was a far-left politician who was almost as opposed to the European Union as Marine Le Pen was. So after all of this, and he was just very anti-establishment, a former Trotskyist who wore a Mao jacket. He just had the look and the attitude of a guy who would have just put his finger in Macron's eye. He actually never, unlike most of the losers in the first round, the 11, this massive menu of candidates who ran in the first round, he didn't really throw his lot behind Emmanuel Macron, at least immediately after he lost in that poll and got 20%. And so, he could have, some of his supporters, especially the young voters, many of them might have gone behind Marine Le Pen, and all of that was in sharp relief just days after that first round vote in the town of Amiens. And that town is where actually Emmanuel Macron was born. But there's a Whirlpool factory there that's moving to Poland, and in the days following this first vote, both of the candidates in this surreal mishmash that's really unusual for French politics, both of them converged upon this small sort of post-industrial city and this Whirlpool factory, and Le Pen was greeted by the workers there. Many of them former leftists. This town used to be a communist bastion here. Many of them really greeted Le Pen, and they booed Macron when he showed up. So it looked for a few days there, right after that first round, that a lot of these far left voters, with their antipathy for the European Union, might have gone for Le Pen and just gone all the way the other way around the circle and gone to the far right. And we were seeing a little bit of those dynamics. And of course, the other candidate, François Fillon, who got 20% of the vote, he was a conservative, but he was a mainstream establishment conservative, and he immediately endorsed Macron after he got only 20% of the vote in that first round. But presumably, quite a few of the 20% of the population who voted for François Fillon could have joined in with a conservative vote and thrown in their lot with Marine Le Pen. The fact that that didn't happen is very significant here, and it's going to be very, very significant moving forward, as I mentioned, to these parliamentary elections next month, when we're going to start seeing how the real shape of French politics is going to fall, where all the cards are really going to fall, and who's really going to inherit power in this very, very divided country.
Very divided. And Chris, I know you want to reflect on what Matt just provided to us. Great context. Thank you for that, Matt. And talking about the youth vote, since Matt brought it up, Chris, the question is, the latest polls before the blackout showed for the youth, Macron was like the third favorite for them. Marine Le Pen was a second favorite. And if that came to pass, what they wanted would be the winner, we would have a different president right now. What is the status of the youth vote in France?
Well, I think, you know, there's a kind of an irony where young people are concerned, young voters are concerned in France. You know, they're part of the 21st century. They enjoy a lot of the benefits of the 21st century. They would like to participate in the 21st century. All that's true. But at heart, a lot of them want the kinds of guarantees in the labor market that their parents had. They want jobs for life. They don't want to be fired. They want permanent, good jobs. And it's very hard to promise that in the 21st century. Macron is not promising it. Mélenchon was. Le Pen was. And that's one of the reasons that Mélenchon and Le Pen thought they might have similar voters, or that Le Pen thought, as Matt was saying, that she could attract those voters. You know, the far left and the far right, it's a little confusing here. Marine Le Pen, if you really want to understand Marine Le Pen, you should think of her as a national socialist. Now, we don't say that because of the unfortunate German contraction of National Socialist, but in fact that's what she is. Her economic policies are anti-business, very socialistic, and combined with xenophobic, nationalistic, anti-immigrant, often thinly veiled racist and sometimes thinly veiled anti-Semitic policies. None of that part of her attracted young people, but the socialistic part did. And the guarantees that she promised them, those appealed to young people. And that's why she thought she could get Mélenchon's voters. But ultimately, I think they just could not stomach the racist aspects of her party.
Yeah, that did not happen. Mélenchon, of course, being the most popular, 3 out of 10, at least in the Ipsos poll, for the youth vote in terms of a candidate. Guy Formand still with us. Can you expand on what Chris and Matt were just talking about, the youth vote here, and that at least by the early numbers here, Guy, it does not appear that they were the linchpin here for the victory of Macron. And again, we don't have all the breakdowns as of yet, but at least leading up to today's vote and then seeing the results, if they got their way, it would not be Macron.
Right. I mean, the youth vote is very much like in the United States, with you had enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders. And in France, the young generation was enthusiastic for Mélenchon, was a far-left candidate. So the youth vote is a bit confused on that, and I agree with the analysis that they would like the benefits of an open Europe, and they want the social guarantee of the welfare state, and this doesn't work. But if I may add one short comment, I mean, listening to your discussion, everybody is a bit lost, and nobody knows how to qualify the candidates, and Macron, sometimes you say the centrist, sometimes you say the liberal, and they usually in France, you know, we have right versus left, and this time you have a new candidate, a new generation, and you don't know, and I don't know how to call him, and because this is a new game. Where the division is between Madame Le Pen. It has been said she's a nationalist and a socialist, and I agree on that, anti-globalization. But how would you qualify Macron? Pro-open society, pro-market, pro-Europe, pro-globalization? We have to find new words, and the comparison has been made rightly so with Justin Trudeau. We have to build a new vocabulary to redefine the political life in the Western world, and especially today in France. So I wouldn't say Macron is a centrist, doesn't mean anything in France. To say the liberal, well, not very clear. So you should say maybe he's what for open society versus closed society maybe. But we really need to reinvent our political vocabulary if we want to understand what's going on.
I want to bring in Jim Shields, professor of French politics at Aston University in England. Jim, thanks for joining us in this conversation, again, on the breaking news of a new president being elected in France, and that's Emmanuel Macron. How would you label Emmanuel Macron?
Well, as your previous speaker said, he's very difficult to categorize. Emmanuel Macron has positioned himself very cleverly at the center of gravity of French politics. And that has been his strength up until now. He has been able to take parts of his policy from the left and the centre, and also from the centre-right. He has also found considerable support on the centre-left and centre-right, and in a sense, he has torn up the rule book that separates right from left, and he has been endorsed in this election right across the mainstream parties. That has been his strength up until now. The problem is, it could, I think, turn into a weakness, because he will find himself now opposed by very coherent political camps. The conservative Republicans, from whom he has drawn support in this election, will be fighting for their parliamentary lives against his movement in June. The centre-left socialists, who gave him a lot of support in this election, will equally be fighting for their political space. So, in a way, he has enjoyed the good times. Now it's going to change. He's going to be challenged by those who were supporting him today. And I think his lack of a very coherent political definition for himself could be a problem.
As we look forward to the next steps, and you brought up the parliamentary elections upcoming here, where do you think that will fare out? Because in order to govern, as we well understand, the new president will need the parliament.
Yes, that's an absolutely crucial point. We have the impression that the French president is this all-powerful office, that he makes the political policy in France and somehow implements it. But that's far from the truth. If we go back to the Constitution, we see that the French president, in principle, is actually a kind of arbiter or moderator of the political game. And he can't govern alone by any means. He needs to govern with the National Assembly, out of which he gets his government. And he has to choose a prime minister who commands support in that National Assembly. And that prime minister, with the president, will then construct a government that can get policy through the National Assembly. Now, how will these elections go in June? Emmanuel Macron is hoping that with his new movement, he can win a majority of seats. Now, there are 577 seats in the National Assembly, so he's going to need 289 or more to form that majority. I think that's a very tall order, a real difficult challenge, because, as we said, the other political parties, which are much more embedded in constituencies than Macron's, will be fighting for every seat.
And what that means, Jim, is that the campaigning will continue.
In these elections in June, he doesn't win a majority from his party. He has to then try to piece one together.
Jim Shields, we'll have to leave it there. We're at the top of our hour, Jim. I can't thank you enough for your perspective. Jim Shields and the rest of our team, Chris Dickey, Steve Clemens, Matt Bradley, thank you all. We're going to take a short break. More on the breaking news coming out of France right after this. We're covering breaking news here at MSNBC in New York City. Watching France at this hour, they have a new president. The breaking news coming out 45 minutes ago, and the results is that Emmanuel Macron, much viewed as the centrist candidate, wins 65% to 35%. These are some of the pictures that are coming out raw to us right now. It appears that Emmanuel Macron is getting ready or preparing or practicing potentially for his victory speech. He has not come to the microphones as of yet. Our understanding that it may happen within the next hour. And you can see now that they are switching this raw feed that we're getting out of France at the moment to video of the streets, and we can see some of the security in the region there in Paris. And then here is in front of where many of you have potentially visited. That's the Louvre, and you can see the tricolor out there in full force. Supporters of Emmanuel Macron in front of the museum in the plaza. getting ready for that speech that it appeared that we saw earlier of Emmanuel Macron getting ready and practicing potentially, and they may not have wanted to be streaming that video, but we got a little peek behind, if you will, the factory doors in terms of what is going to be upcoming for the newly elected president of France, Emmanuel Macron, only 45 minutes in to this distinction for this 39-year-old. On that note, the youngest ever president there in France at, again, not even 40, 39 years old, and expected now to be looking forward to the parliamentary elections upcoming in June. Similar to the United States, in order to rule, he will have to have, or to govern rather, he will have to work with the parliament to affect any sort of change and, of course, his legislative agenda. With us this hour, Matt Bradley, Chris Dickey from the Daily Beast, NBC's Matt Bradley. We also have Steve Clemens from the Atlantic. Matt, I want to start with you on this. You've been reporting on this every hour on the hour for days on end. Give us what we know at this moment. It is, what, 9 p.m. local time?
That's right. The polls just closed an hour ago, so if you're just joining us, this news is very fresh. And actually, as you just mentioned, Marine Le Pen, who was the far-right populist candidate, she conceded about 45 minutes ago, and it really is astonishing how fast French polls are able to produce something like a result almost immediately after the polls close. And the polls closed an hour, I believe, an hour earlier here in Paris, but nationwide, almost immediately after we got the results. And those results were about 65%, slightly more than 65% for Emmanuel Macron, and about 35% for Marine Le Pen. Emmanuel Macron, as you mentioned, is going to be becoming the youngest president to sit in the Élysée Palace in French history. He's never before held an elected office. He has held public office before. He was the economy minister under the current president, Francois Hollande. And, you know, that was one of the things, of course, that Marine Le Pen tried to present, tried to paint him as Hollande bis here. That's the term for an apartment building or an address that has sort of a side entrance or a different address right next to it. So she was trying to portray Macron not only as an establishment figure, not only as a banker and a globalist, to use the parlance of Steve Bannon and the others, but as somebody who was close to the current prime minister, or excuse me, current president, whose polling figures put him in the single digits. He was one of the most unpopular presidents in the Fifth Republic of France in generations. And he actually bowed out. He could have run again for the presidency. He decided not to because his approval ratings were so abysmally low. So that's a pitfall that Emmanuel Macron has to look forward to, or has to avoid going forward. You know, the Francois Hollande had tried to create something of a big tent. He was a socialist president, but he had tried to run for the left wing, and then he sort of tacked right when he was in office with business-friendly reforms. This made him extremely unpopular to both sides of the political spectrum here in France. And Macron, as something of a centrist, and we were discussing this in the last hour, Richard, you remember how difficult it is to pin Macron, how difficult it is to put him in a box. He's going to be running into just that same problem. Does he move to the left?
Matt,
does he move to the right?
It appears that Emmanuel Macron is actually taking to the microphones earlier than we thought. We will go straight to Emmanuel Macron. Stand by if you can, Matt. Thank you so much. Emmanuel Macron.
Because nothing was written. I wish to tell you, to thank you. Thank you. Thank you from my heart. My gratitude goes to all of you who brought me your vote and support. I will never forget you. I will put all my care and energy to be dignified of your confidence. But it is up to you now, citizens of our country, that whatever your choice was, I wish to address myself to you. Many difficulties have weakened us since a long time. I know them all, the economical difficulties, the social fractures, and the democratic problems, as well as the moral weakness of the country. I wish this evening to greet Madame Le Pen. I know the divisions of our country that have led some to extreme votes. I respect them. I know the anger, the anguish, the doubts that many of you have expressed. It is my responsibility to listen to you, protecting the most vulnerable, organizing solidarity in a better way, fighting against all forms of inequality and discrimination, making sure that your security is guaranteed, as well as the unity of the nation. Because behind each word that I am saying, I know that there are faces, men and women, children and families, whole lives. It's you and your loved ones. This evening, I'm addressing myself to all of you together, the people of France. We have obligations towards our countries. We have inherited a very important history and a humanist message that we address the world. This history and this message, we need to transmit it to our children, first of all, but we also need to bring it into the future. I will defend France, its vital interest, its image, its message. I take the engagement in front of you. I will defend Europe. I will defend the community of destinies that the people of our continent have given themselves. It is our civilization that's at stake, our lifestyle, our freedom, our values, our common undertakings, and our hope. I will to strengthen the link between Europe and its people, between Europe and its citizens. I address on your behalf to the nations of the world the greetings of fraternal France. I tell their heads of states that France will be present and attentive to peace, to the balance of powers, international cooperation, to the respect of engagements on development and fight against climate change. I tell you all that France will be on the first line on the fight against terrorism in France as well as internationally. As long as this fight will take, we will fight it without weakness. My dear fellow citizens, a new page of our long history is opening today. I wish that this evening there will be hope and confidence. The renewal of our public life will be imposed to everyone starting tomorrow. The moralization of our public life, the recognition of pluralism, the vitality of democracy will be from day first the base of my action. I will not let any obstacles stop me. I will act with determination and in the respect of everybody. Because through work, education and culture, we will build a better future. French people, my dear fellow citizens, I wish this evening to salute President Hollande. During 5 years, he worked for our country. During the coming 5 years, my responsibility will be to deal with fears. We need to renew with optimism. We need to find the enterprise spirit that defines the French genius. My responsibility will be to resemble all the women and men ready to face the enormous challenges in front of us. Some of those challenges are lucky, like the development of Europe, and others of those challenges are threats, like terrorism. I will fight with all my force against the division. That's how we will give the French people, to each one of you, in his or her professional personal life, the chances that France owes you. Let's love France. From this evening and for the coming 5 years, I will modestly, with dedication and determination, will serve France on your behalf. Long live the Republic. Long live France.
Emmanuel Macron there speaking. Emmanuel Macron speaking, the new president of France, for about 6 minutes. His opponent, Marine Le Pen, speaking for about 1 or 2 minutes. Some of the thematics there is that he would, of course, like to bring the country together, that he does respect those who voted for Marine Le Pen, his opponent, who is seen as a far-right candidate. He, at the end of his candidacy, Macron seen as a centrist, relatively to his opponent, and that he understands that there's anger in the country that he will also address. Steve Clemens still with us, Matt Bradley, Chris Dickey also with us. I want to start off with NBC News' Matt Bradley. We heard him speak. We were listening to Marine Le Pen earlier here, Matt. A comparison of messages. Emmanuel Macron, very even-toned throughout his entire delivery. Marine Le Pen also, by most at least, manifestations of emotion, very straightforward as well.
That's right. I mean, I think if you were to have seen a Marine Le Pen acceptance speech, it might have looked a little bit like Donald Trump's inauguration speech. You would have heard some of the darker images that she's actually brought up when she made a speech 2 weeks ago, when she accepted the mantle of moving on until this round of the election. And that's when she talked about the savage globalization that was destroying France, the multiculturalism that seemed to be undermining French culture, and she called on the French people to go back to French culture and protect it, and to protect their businesses and their industries from what she called, as again, this savage globalization. So it's kind of like the American carnage that Donald Trump threw out in his inauguration speech. You just would have heard much darker terms, and now instead she's talking about leading the opposition. Clearly, that's something that she feels very comfortable doing. She's done it for decades, but not the outcome that she wanted or any of her supporters wanted. Richard?
Chris, I'm going to get to you in just a second. I want to go to Steve Clemens because he has to leave us shortly. Steve Clemens, is this a loss for Donald Trump? He did not endorse Marine Le Pen, but he did say in an interview with the Associated Press, quote, that Le Pen is the strongest on borders and she's the strongest on what's been going on in France, end quote.
Absolutely, it's a loss for Donald Trump. Donald Trump may not have formally endorsed Marine Le Pen, but he endorsed over these many months the kind of typology of Marine Le Pen and her followers wherever they may be in the world. The meetings with Nigel Farage, the salutes to Marine Le Pen, and this kind of nativist, jingoistic, isolationist, anti-globalist rhetoric. There was beginning to develop a league, if you will, from Trump to some of these other characters around the world that presented, as the previous speaker just said, a very dark vision of the choices in the world. We just heard Macron say that he would not allow discrimination of anyone within that society. That was a very strong message, I felt, on the kind of inclusive picture that he represented, which is a stark contrast to what we've seen from the Donald Trumps and Marine Le Pen's of the world today. He also put in a comment in there about climate change and standing not only by France, but by the community of nations in Europe. So he is, you know, with everyone saying it's hard to peg him, he is an open society guy. He's not going to be a closed society or someone who's going to tolerate discrimination or racism or those kinds of, you know, knife edges within society. And you know, I think Donald Trump has been dividing and celebrating some of those divides in American society, as was Marine Le Pen.
Steve, there's at least some 5 elections happening in countries in the EU in 2017. They're looking at France. They're seeing the results. They clearly have been looking at who the 2 candidates represent. What do you think they're seeing?
Well, I think they're seeing a harsh choice. They're going to see it, you know, Europe as a whole, all of these countries have felt under extreme stress economically from the various episodes of terrorism that have occurred and from the refugee crisis that have hit some of these countries. So it has pushed the political order to the edge in some of these countries, and Marine Le Pen was a manifestation of much of that frustration. So to see France choose openness I think is a signal of confidence in that style of government, in that style of society. I think it's going to be vital for Germany and Angela Merkel and the vote that's coming up there, and in other countries. And we've seen this concern that Brexit and the kind of wanting to withdraw and cut off and return to a kind of old nationalism, old national walls, old national boundaries was something that was beginning to appeal to other countries. But this step that France has just taken it gives a lot of headwinds to that. And I think that you now have, you're going to have a richer choice, a more interesting choice in these countries. And I don't think it will automatically turn into this bleak, dark vision that we've been worried about evolving over this last year.
Steve Clemens from The Atlantic, MSNBC contributor. Always a pleasure to speak with you, my friend.
Thank you, Richard.
I know you have a busy day in front of you, so thank you for stopping by. Getting over to Chris Dickey, if we're looking at Brexit as a major benchmark, if we're looking at the French presidential election today being the second major data point or benchmark, what's the third major data point you're watching here, Chris, as you so closely watch what is happening not only in France but across Europe in what you do?
Well, you know, I think that the next one actually is going to be the legislative elections here, because all the good news for the globalists that we're hearing right now with the election of Macron could all turn to dust if he can't organize the National Assembly in an effective manner after the elections in June. And then, of course, we've got the German elections coming up in September. But Matt and I were just talking. I think there's been an exaggeration of the possibilities of the alternative for Deutschland, the AfD party, the sort of the Trumpist, Le Penist party of Germany. It was never going to poll very high in the German polls. And the choice there is essentially going to be between the very pro-Europe Merkel and the even more pro-Europe Martin Schulz. So I think that will be another barrier raised against the kind of, I think Steve Bannon likes the word deconstruction of Europe that essentially was being advocated by the people around Trump and by the Nigel Farages of this world, and that brought us Brexit. I don't think we will see another European exit even remotely like the one that Britain voted for.
Chris, from what you know of Emmanuel Macron, clearly he is the youngest ever elected in France. How did his age help him, you believe, you think?
You know what? I don't think it helped him that much. I think one of the problems that Macron is going to have is that he will be, I'm sure we will see headlines describing him as charismatic, but he's not charismatic. He is a young, smart guy who's appealing. He has, very nice blue eyes. He looks good in a suit. But he doesn't electrify crowds. He doesn't electrify his voters. That's why so many people voted for him by default and not because they wanted to choose him. In terms of personalities, he's going to have trouble turning his personality into that kind of magnetic figure that probably France needs to go into the direction he wants. The other thing about Macron, people are going to try and take advantage of him precisely because he's young. They're going to say he's a young guy, he's inexperienced. But I don't think people understand. They may understand how smart he is. I don't think they understand how tough he is, how reluctant he is to back down on a position. He considers where he wants to be, what position he wants to take, and then he sticks with it. It is, in the European context, in the French context, it seemed extraordinary to see him waving a European flag, to see him saying the kinds of things he was saying about immigration, about terrorism, all those kinds of things. It's not that he was soft on any of those issues, not that he was stupid, but he was never appealing to the gut. He was appealing to reason, and it's a word he loves to use, reason. So in the best of worlds, what the French voted for in this election was reason over emotion, was hope over fear and anger.
Chris Dickey.
That fear and anger will come back if he can't deliver.
Chris Dickey, Matt Bradley, stand by. We're going to take a short break. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the celebrations there. Emmanuel Macron supporters in front of the Louvre, that beautiful pyramid made of some 700 different pieces of glass, and the tricolor being waved up in the air as it looks like a DJ, as well as performers are continuing into what looks to be a beautiful night after some sprinkles earlier in the day. 9:20 p.m. in Paris. Macron supporters headquarters. French citizens who supported the centrist candidate going to sleep a little bit better tonight. We'll return to France. We'll return to the results of the French election on this Sunday after this. Breaking news here at MSNBC. This is obviously not in New York City where we are based. This is Paris, France. The beautiful pyramid at the Louvre there, the museum, and they are celebrating to great effect, I'd say, at this moment at 9:24 p.m. the victory of Emmanuel Macron, the new president of France. And he did it with resounding numbers, 65% to 35%. And we also are getting responses not only from those who supported Macron in France, but also the President of the United States. Donald Trump just tweeting this moments ago, congratulations to Emmanuel Macron on his big win today as the next president of France. I look very much forward to working with him. And that just coming from President Trump. This is not consistent with statements he had made before. He was supporter of Emmanuel Macron's opponent, Marine Le Pen, the candidate that was seen as a far-right candidate there in France. And so reactions will continue to come in. We'll share that with you. This, again, the results only coming into us about an hour ago. The polls closed an hour and 25 minutes ago, as Matt Bradley was telling us, and with great speed and efficacy, we got the numbers right after the polls closed in terms of the projections, official numbers, and then the speeches first came from Marine Le Pen, then followed about 5 minutes ago from the winner, Emmanuel Macron. But in the lead up to these results, there was a lot of questions in terms of where would the numbers land. And this is because of what was being reported as being a very large and major cyber hack of Emmanuel Macron and his servers. Some 14 gigabytes, it was estimated, of data pulled out, including emails and documents and much more, all this happening online. To give us reflection on that is Gizmodo technology editor Michael Nunez. Michael, it looks like if the numbers, if the documents, excuse me, if the size of the documents were large, that the effect in the end was either zero or very low based on the results.
Yeah, that appears to be the case, but certainly, you know, ahead of today, there was a lot of skepticism about sort of whether, you know, whether voters would turn out in these numbers and whether that would hold true. You know, Russia has basically, you know, started to use hacking as sort of a weapon of choice in disrupting elections around the world. And although they haven't been identified as the you know, people behind the hacking of Emmanuel Macron's emails, there is strong evidence to suggest that it may very well be another attempt from Russia to interfere with Western elections.
Yeah, because of the 48 blackout period and the hack happening and announced just hours before that blackout began, there was a lot of concern from the Macron camp. Well, we can't respond to it. We can't talk about it. On the flip side, neither could his opponent, Marine Le Pen. They couldn't talk about it either. So the question is, well, was there any effect overall? Because the opponents also could not leverage that. The question now moving forward, though, is these groups that are getting into and hacking into election campaigns systems, what is next? I was mentioning earlier we have at least 5 other elections in the EU upcoming this year. They've got to be concerned, okay, what will happen to our campaigns, election systems and election servers that are being utilized?
Yeah, I think, you know, well, one important detail to mention is that U.S. intelligence agencies warned about this following the successful hack of the Democratic National Committee during the U.S. elections. So, you know, senior U.S. intelligence officials said that this could very well happen in elections around the world. Of course, you know, France happens to be the first to have gone through this process, but, you know, others to watch are, as you said, other members of the of the EU. So you know, Germany would be you know, an obvious election to watch, and there are several others that will occur over the next 6 to 9 months. So you know, I think one reason why Russia and frankly other governments around the world have used hacking to disrupt elections and used hacking as a political operation is because it's very low cost and it's very effective. Well, you know, you can.
It is low cost, but I have to interrupt for a second here. Folks might say, okay, so this is similar than other hacks that happened during the U.S. election, as we reported on quite widely. How come we can't figure this out? It's not like we don't have a lot of pretty good eggheads sitting around doing some pretty great things. I mean, the power of the nerd is very strong.
Yeah, you would think so, but also, you know, you have to look at things like, you know, last week there was a Google Docs hack that was passed around around U.S. media and also around, you know, around some government entities. So, you know, the problem is controlling thousands or even just hundreds of people, right? You can't. It's really hard to keep everyone informed and up to date on what they should be watching for. You know, these phishing attacks are actually very sophisticated and can often look like official correspondence. So, you know, so these things are very well thought out and very well executed, clearly, and they're hard to protect against, quite frankly.
Michael Nunez from Gizmodo, thank you so much, my friend. We'll, of course, be revisiting this storyline, unfortunately, I imagine, in the coming elections, as I was reporting on throughout Europe in this coming year. Thank you so much for your perspective on that. Live pictures still showing France, 9:20 p.m. Emmanuel Macron, the new president of France, the youngest ever at the age of 39. No better a backdrop than the Louvre and that beautiful pyramid, as I was mentioning earlier, some 670-odd pieces of glass that make and comprise this entrance to the museum. We're going to continue following the results coming out of France and what it means for the United States. And on the Pulse of America, which is the 3 o'clock show Eastern here on MSNBC, we will be asking you your thoughts on what has happened there in France as you enjoy these pictures in the late evening on a Sunday. We're following breaking news here on MSNBC and taking you straight to Paris, France, where celebrations abound right now at a very popular tourist spot, and that's the Louvre. In the plaza in front, you can kind of get a sense here of the tricolor flags, and you can see young and old celebrating a new president for France. Amazing pictures here, as they, I imagine, if you understand France well, they will be up to the late hours of the evening. Those who supported Emmanuel Macron, who will be the new president of France. The numbers that we have so far, 65% to 35%. If you're just joining us here on MSNBC, Marine Le Pen, who said she got 16 million votes, thanked them for their support, but again, coming up 30 percentage points short of her opponent, Emmanuel Macron, who gave his victory speech within the last hour. Marine Le Pen giving her concession speech also within the last hour and a half. And we want to remind you that the results and the end of voting, that only happened about 90 minutes ago. So we are getting you the very latest in terms of what is happening. The sun sets there in France. That does not mean that the noise will subside at all. It appears like, at least from these pictures we're looking at on the left-hand side. Still with us covering this landslide victory here, NBC's Matt Bradley. We also have the Daily Beast World News editor and MSNBC contributor Chris Dickey, who have really been able to give us fantastic context on what we're seeing here in France and what it means for the United States. Matt Bradley, we were talking with Chris a moment ago about youth, and he being the youngest president ever at the age of 39. But there's also his business acumen and whether he will be able to translate that to governing.
Hard to know. This is a country that's really, it's a traditionalist country, and part of that tradition comes in the form of its economic traditions. There's the social model here really looms large over everything. If you remember back in the 80s, some of the leaders here tried to implement sort of a Thatcherist model where they wanted to take some of the nationalized corporations and privatize them. Those were met with massive protests and resistance from the population. And as my colleague Chris Dickey just said a moment ago, you know, a lot of the young people here, they have the same expectations for the same social model, the same social safety nets that their parents enjoyed. But at the same time, that comes with a lot of pitfalls. If you're a young person here, you're much more likely to be unemployed. Unemployment, especially, like I was just in Marseille, unemployment down there, which is the second largest city in France, for young people, it's about 25%. So 1 out of every 4 young people in that major city, many of them immigrants, many of them Muslim, they're unemployed. And that's a disastrous situation for so many people. And Macron's point, and one of the reasons why he's actually tacked left on social issues and right on economic issues, and this is one of the reasons why we call him a radical centrist. He doesn't fit really into any of these molds. He's actually wants to try to liberate the French economy from what he sees as the shackles that are holding it back from zooming ahead, maybe not so much like the American economy, but like some of the other European partners that are actually doing quite well. Remember, part of the reason why Macron won just in these last couple of weeks is that the European Union has actually improved. It's been doing better. And if you look at the celebrations that we're seeing now in front of the Louvre, mixed in with so many of those French tricolor flags are the European Union flags. And that was one of the things that Macron was celebrating throughout his campaign. It would be very unusual in America to see a French presidential or American presidential candidate holding up the flag of a supranational entity that had governance powers over certain parts of its legal system, of its economic system. But that's exactly what Macron was doing. He could have been one of those people out in that crowd tonight waving the European Union flag. And so he sees a stronger European Union as benefiting toward a stronger France. That was part of the ethos he brought to this campaign, and that's what he's going to be bringing to his presidency. And a lot of that means breaking with the past. If you look around, and I've been walking around these streets here
Chris,
on this Sunday here.
I've got a question for you.
And even though just because it's sorry,
Matt. I thought
even though I mean everything is everything has been closed here. Yeah. And one of the things that Emmanuel Macron tried to do as economy minister is just such a simple thing. Try to allow for businesses to be opened, more businesses to be opened on Sundays. They don't have that in France.
Matt, I apologize. We had a drop in audio, so I wasn't sure whether we had a technical issue or not. Chris Dickey, the interesting part as we look at these pictures live on the celebrations are the faces. And throughout the last couple of hours, as we look very closely, Matt was noting the flags, the tricolor, as well as the European Union flag. I was also noticing the differences in faces. And for those who aren't familiar with the demographic breakdown of metropolitan France, roughly 1 in 10 are minority. How did that factor in the issue of immigration, which has been talked about in the narrative of France and the United States? But how might that have panned out in today's election? Either the electorate and minorities who are part of that electorate, or the thematic of immigration and immigration?
Well, I think we have given a lot of coverage over the last few months and even years to fear of immigration and fear of Muslim minority here and all the fears that are connected with that. And we haven't really focused on the fact that by about 2012, by the last presidential election, we had a whole second generation of people who were from Muslim and other immigrant backgrounds, but largely Muslim backgrounds, who were old enough to vote. And they were not only old enough to vote, they were fielding candidates. They were getting involved with the system. And they felt betrayed by the results of what happened in 2012 because they went massively for François Hollande and got very little in return. In this election, in the first round, we know that the largest group, 30-some% of the people who identify themselves as Muslims, voted for Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the far-left candidate. We don't know what the exact breakdown is now, but it's a good guess that virtually all the people of Muslim backgrounds in the second round voted for Emmanuel Macron. So the question is, can he deliver for them? It's not just a question of saying, let's not be afraid of immigrants, let's not be afraid of people from those backgrounds. The question is, can we get them out of what are called the banlieue, these housing projects on the far outskirts of the cities of France? Can we give them a future? Matt's right in Marseille. Yeah, the unemployment rate is at 25%, but among those young people, the unemployment rate is 40%. They have to be brought into the system. Whether Macron can do it, I don't know, but it was clear that Le Pen was going to try and exclude them completely.
Yeah, those areas that are not too far necessarily, 30 to 40 minutes from where you're standing there, like Saint-Denis and during the Bataclan catastrophe, places which were called, right, defined as no-go zones, and how will they get help under this new presidency? This is also the hour here at MSNBC. It's 3:42 in the afternoon, where we normally have what's called the Pulse of America, and we ask questions for you to get your views on a question of the day related to current events. Today, obviously, we're covering the breaking news of the election in France. We want to get your thoughts on this. Are you satisfied with the results of the French election? Where you go to let us know what you think is pulse.msnbc.com/America. Pulse.msnbc.com/America. Are you satisfied with the results of the French election? And if you're just joining us, the results are Emmanuel Macron, the centrist candidate, wins with 65% of the vote, 35% of the vote for his opponent, who was seen as the far-right candidate, and she came in again with 35%. So are you satisfied with the results of the French election? Joining me now to continue the conversation, along with Matt and Chris, is Mediapart U.S. correspondent Philip Cost. Philippe, what is your thought about what we may be missing in this conversation of the results of the election in France?
I haven't heard all your conversation before, unfortunately, but I think the level of abstention is unprecedented, and it shows that actually Emmanuel Macron will have a hard task ahead of him to really make a national reconciliation around its values. A lot of people might have been from the Le Pen camp, Le Pen side, may have abstained after the dismal debate or dismal performance at the debate, but also a lot of people on the extreme left of Mélenchon. So this is one aspect. It's a proof of a constant discontent by a large part of the population for the options that were given during this election. The other aspect is I was struck, and I was very interested by the last part of your conversation about minorities, the question of racism in France and so on. It's been the diversity and the idea of a multicultural France has been some kind of a third rail for politics in France. Both the left and the institutional right have both dismissed the question, or they've used it in a way. They've used some of the vocabulary of the extreme right wing of Mrs. Le Pen just in an attempt to neutralize a part of the discontent and use actually, the left and the right agreed on some kind of a reluctance towards integration, be it for religious factor, the question of secularism in France seen from the left side, or in many cases pure racism or fear of the unknown or fear of terrorism on the right-hand side. So both sides have been extremely, I would say, hypocritical in the treatment of the question of minorities. Even Emmanuel Macron, his last debate on Mediapart, actually on the website, the day before the elections, was asked, do you believe in a multicultural society? You had said you were against it. And in a way he said, well, I'm for a diverse France, but I'm not for this kind of multiculturalism in the Anglo-Saxon way. So we still don't know exactly what they mean.
What does that mean?
Yes, there's this strange myth in France, and it's been one of the pretexts for immobilism, for a total laissez-faire and a total disregard in a way for minorities in France. The idea that if we take care of the minorities, or if at least we count them statistically, we will end up in some of a communitarism, some kind of a ghetto society, or a society where the values of the Republic will not encompass the whole population, but will have this kind of patchwork society the French authorities have always dreaded. And I think because of that myth, the idea of that the Republic was supposed to regroup and protect equally all of its citizens.
Well, Philippe, is Macron the right guy to fix this unfortunate dynamic that you're describing?
I think he has at least started talking, and it was very courageous of him during his debate against Marine Le Pen to say and repeat that France has a part of responsibility in the radicalization of some parts of the youth of Muslim descent in the country, the failure at school, the problems of infrastructures, the problem of ghettos, the exclusion, and the racism and those young people may have suffered during their life creates a favorable ground for radicalization. And he had the courage to say that during the debate against Marine Le Pen, which is a good omen in my opinion. If he wants to fix some society problems, I think he understood that. It's also the start of his presidency. Will he really keep up his word? Let's not forget that Nicolas Sarkozy, when he was elected the first time, had promised some kind of a system of affirmative action in France, and he quickly forgot it when the tension became too hard on the right side.
Philippe Coste from Mediapart, U.S. correspondent. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.
Joining us now, Politico's Hadass Gold, Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli. Let's pull up the reaction from President Trump, first off, on the results of the French election. And in his tweet, he clearly congratulates Emmanuel Macron, the centrist candidate, on the big win. He says, "Today is the next president of France. I look very much forward to working with him." Hadass, can this President Trump, work well with Emmanuel Macron? They're both quite wealthy. They both did not have any political experience, if you will, elected experience before they became the leaders of their respective countries. So it seems like they might be able to have a lot in common.
There is some in common, especially, as you said, these parallel political paths to power. But Donald Trump had expressed some support of Marine Le Pen. He never endorsed her officially, but he had expressed that he felt that she was stronger on issues such as border security. However, as we all saw with that tweet, and also a statement from the press secretary that just came out, there is congratulatory notes, and then they're going to start working towards a good relationship. But Macron comes from a clearly sort of different point of view than Donald Trump does. I mean, can you imagine some sort of globalist flags being waving at a Donald Trump rally like there are EU flags right now in Paris? It's a little bit of a different dynamic there.
A different dynamic, and we look at this, Kevin, it is not only that there's those complexities of a nationalist, globalist mixture that is happening in what is France and what is, as we all know, a provincial approach to not only culture but ideas and the way that you live day to day, which is somewhat different than the way we live here in the United States. There's that, but then there's also, moving forward, whether or not this president and his White House staff are looking at the results here and seeing a 30 percentage point difference that basically says your idea of economic nationalism, of nationalism specifically, does not seem to be, at this point, translatable to a European theater, at least not in France.
Right, Richard, and I think if you look at market reaction, the euro is now trading higher above the yen and the dollar. So clearly market reaction has been somewhat positive to this centrist candidate winning. That said, I also would slightly disagree with Hadassah's point, simply because if you look at President Trump when he met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel just the other week, you know, at the White House, these are two world leaders who also, similarly to what we're watching in France, who have had very different world views. But I think if you look at that summit, this White House showed with Angela Merkel that they are able to try to find common grounds, particularly on the area of national security. And I think that what you're watching now unfold, coming from the statements coming from the White House, Richard, is that this again is a pivot from the administration to try to reach out and again try to find that commonality to work with them on issues like national security.
As you and others who cover the White House and the Hill and D.C., where has been Steve Bannon in recent days and recent weeks? But he has been brought up here, Kevin, in conversations with me in the last hour and a half with those who are watching the elections in France. And the question might be the resonance that this idea of the Trump administration, the Trump effect, or the Trump overhang, if you will, may not have helped Marine Le Pen. And as has been said, she didn't necessarily completely sync with Donald Trump, if you will, publicly.
I think it's always interesting when U.S. presidents try to mingle in European politics. I'm thinking back to when former President Barack Obama spoke out against Brexit, and then, of course, we all know how that turned out. So, you know, look, there are different political implications across the board, and look, you're right. I mean, this clearly was a choice, with Le Pen being more in line with the type of anti-immigration type of philosophy that we have come to see, and there's no doubt that this will be framed through that lens. I think, though, from the broader standpoint of where this conversation is headed, I think that from the issue, it's headed toward national security and NATO. And I think that as you look forward to these bilateral trade agreements and you look forward to international trip coming up with President Trump, I think you're going to be hearing a lot about ways in which France and Germany in particular are going to be able to potentially work with the United States despite their remarkable differences. But I also think, and I would just quickly make this point, Richard, that the Democratic Party itself has a lot to learn from what we're watching overseas right now across the pond, simply because this is a party that is looking for a leader and could perhaps see the foundations for a path to victory by watching what unfolded in France.
There's a lot of work to be done on the left here in the United States, as you're intimating. I want to bring into our conversation, if we can here, Hadassah and Kevin, Michael Isikoff, who is the chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News. Michael, thanks for stopping by, old friend. And
sure enough.
A big headline coming into this, the hack. Right, and this is clearly a loss for the hackers, because if they were trying to mitigate a success for Emmanuel Macron, it didn't work.
Right, and look, there's just a lot we still don't know about who was behind this. There are indications that this could have been Russian hackers, perhaps state-sponsored. And if that's the case, though, even though they were not successful this time, that would be a huge deal. Because if you go back to what happened in our election last November, the intelligence community not only concluded that was the Russians. It pointed out that they had done this, interfered in European elections before, and would likely do it again. And there was a huge debate about whether the response from the Obama administration was strong enough at the time. And if they did not respond more swiftly and more strongly to the Russian hack last year, that the Russians would feel emboldened and would feel the freedom to meddle, not just in our elections, but in other elections. If that's what happened here, that's going to reignite that debate. And I want to put on top of that, if you remember, President Trump, who it seemed to finally accept the conclusion of the intelligence community that the Russians were behind last year's hack, then seemed to step back from it just a few days ago, just last week, in that interview he did with John Dickerson from Face the Nation, where he said, well, it might have been Russian, but it could have been China, it could have been somebody else, which did send a signal that the Trump administration was going to take this even less seriously than the Obama administration did, and the Obama administration was being criticized. So I think that's something we should keep our eye on in the days ahead.
Something we need to keep our eyes on as well here, Michael, is whether this is the new normal or not, right? Should we expect us in upcoming elections to have these sort of headlines days before or hours before a major and pivotal election? We're watching some pictures here coming in what we believe to be the motorcade of the elected the president-elect, Emmanuel Macron. We expect him to be arriving at the Louvre, which we've been watching live pictures. I just wanted to let folks know what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. But in 30 seconds, if you can here, Michael, reflecting on that idea of the new normal.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, we've focused on the Russians because they have been the most prominent, but it is also conceivable that other actors, having seen the Russian success in last year in our election, have now feel they can engage in this as well. Other state-sponsored, other private actors, we don't know. It is a reminder, again, of the need for greater cybersecurity, but also a reminder of the threats to all our democracies from this sort of action.
Michael Isikoff, thank you so much. Chief of Investigative Correspondent for Yahoo News. Also Hadas Gold, Kevin Cirilli from Political and Bloomberg. Hopefully they'll be able to stay with us. We are watching, of course, the results coming out of France. We'll have more as the motorcade of the president-elect of France is heading towards the big celebration there at the plaza in front of the Louvre Museum entrance. And thank you all who participated on our Pulse of America question. Are you satisfied with the results of the French election? You can find those results on our Facebook page. Emmanuel Macron wins the French presidential election in a historic landslide. That's a breaking news at the top of the hour here on MSNBC at a headquarters in New York City. We go straight to France, where the centrist candidate defeating far-right populist Marine Le Pen. NBC's Matt Bradley has been live for us from Paris, as well as Daily Beast World News editor and MSNBC contributor Chris Dickey. Start the top of the hour for us here, Matt, and where we are right now. We understand that the president-elect is on his way to that big celebration down by the Louvre.
That's right. Emmanuel Macron has already addressed the public, but he seemed to do it in a closed setting in his office. And in fact, as you mentioned, Richard, before, we got a little bit of a sneak peek with some of those cameras allowed us to see the makeup being applied. So it was clear that he wasn't addressing the massive crowds that have gathered under very, very tight security in that iconic Louvre in front of the pyramid there, the IMP building right there with DJs and rap acts playing. It seems now that Emmanuel Macron is going to address the nation once again, this time in front of adoring flag-waving crowds, some waving the French tricolore, others waving the European Union flag, which, as we mentioned, Emmanuel Macron has ridden to power, championing the European Union against his anti-EU opponent, Marine Le Pen. And as you mentioned earlier, Richard, Macron, this sort of radical centrist, self-stylized unity government, a big tent centrist, he won by about 65% to Marine Le Pen's about 35%, where some of those votes are still being counted. But we believe those are more or less going to be the final numbers going forward. And Emmanuel Macron will be the youngest president in French history to go into the Élysée Palace here in France.
Again,
Richard?
Watching those live pictures on the left-hand side of your screen there of the president-elect Macron heading to that big celebration that we're talking about. And they've been on the road for a little bit. We shall see when they do arrive. And, of course, we'll be there watching with them. Chris Dickey, those numbers, the results here, that 30 percentage point gap notwithstanding, what surprised you in the outcome of this election?
I was actually surprised that the abstention level was not higher. I thought from many people that I talked to that people who had voted for the former prime minister, the right-wing conservative François Fillon, that they would not vote Mélenchon, the left-wing, far-left candidate who had done surprisingly well in the first round, he never told his people to vote for Macron. He told them, don't vote for Le Pen, but he left wide open, the possibility that they should abstain completely. So I think there was a lot of reason to think that the turnout would be much lower than, in fact, it was. I think Philippe, who was on earlier, was saying the abstention was very high. I'm not sure that the numbers actually bear that out. I think it's very surprising, given the kind of discontent about this vote that existed among a lot of people, that they really did go out and vote in the end.
And Matt, do we know when we'll have a better sense of that number, those who abstained but still did go to the polls? We had an earlier number of 77, 78% of those who did participate, but we don't know we didn't have the abstention numbers at that moment.
No, and we also don't have the blank ballot numbers, as far as I know. A lot of people were planning to put blank pieces of paper in the urns, in the ballot boxes, or empty envelopes. I'm sure we'll have the numbers for those pretty shortly, if they don't already exist someplace. But I think those will be interesting numbers to look at, because some people thought they could be decisive, basically because people thought that Le Pen's voters were very enthusiastic about her core voters, but Macron's were not all that enthusiastic about him, so there was some expectation that blank ballots would work in her favor.
I want to bring in to our conversation here, Matt and Chris, Mark Dean, Deputy Bureau Chief in Paris for Bloomberg. Mark, what will the new president-elect say when he hits that stage next to, as Matt was telling us, DJs and rap artists? What do you think his tone will be? He was fairly straightforward in his victory speech that was broadcast earlier.
Well, I think that you saw the victory speech earlier was very serious and grave, in stark contrast to his first words out of the box in the first round. Right. So I think there'll be a bit more of acknowledgement of the joy of victory when he gets to the Louvre, and really thanking his supporters.
I'm sorry?
He'll be thanking, you know, what he will do in this second speech now is probably thank his reporters and indulge their happiness tonight more than anything else.
I'm sorry, because we do have some communicative challenges along the way sometimes on these breaking news days, Mark, so I appreciate you working with me on this. What do you think will be the next key steps? We were talking about this in the last hour, that he is going to, having run under this big tent, big umbrella platform, where does he start?
Well, the start is forming his government, naming a prime minister, naming ministers, and that will be a key part not only of building on his momentum of tonight, but uniting the country and essentially preparing for the legislative elections in June, and taking attack at the Republicans and the Socialists, who all intend to run again, and try to block his way.
I want to go back to Chris Dickey and Matt Bradley, who are still with us here, sharing some of the responses here. Matt and Nigel Farage said this. As many know, he led the effort to take Britain out of the European Union. Brexit is what we're talking about. He tweeted this, saying that Macron offers 5 more years of failure, power to the EU, and open borders. There still remain those critics of it within the EU, what this new presidency might mean not only for France, but clearly looking at the EU more broadly.
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Richard. I mean, a lot of these characters who have come before the predecessors and the colleagues of people like Marine Le Pen, they were expecting that Trump's victory and that the Brexit before that would signal a massive wave of populist sentiment that would wash all across Europe. And it seems that tonight, at least, that wave has crashed onto French shores, and we're not sure how much further it's going to go. Now, Marine Le Pen has said that she's going to be in the head of the opposition, which which is, as my colleague Christopher Dickey just said, she's probably more comfortable being in the opposition than she would be in power. But her, her predecessors and her colleagues, their fate doesn't necessarily bode well for her. Nigel Farage went from championing Brexit to now he quit his position with the European Parliament. He quit the head position of his party, UKIP, and now he has the distinguished position as a paid commentator for Fox News. Frauke Petry in Germany tried to make her AfD party more moderate, more welcoming, and she was basically pushed out or resigned from the head of that party. A lot of these people, these sort of anti-globalist, anti-immigrant crusaders, once they either succeed or fail, they actually fall into obscurity, and the parties that they led, the causes that they led, follow them. And so it's not clear if Ms. Le Pen is going to have that same outcome.
And the narrative there of Nigel Farage, which you encapsulated so well, Matt, interesting within itself, but it is that impetus that he had and where it will go going forward. Chris, if you just look at the GDP figures of the EU without Britain, and Britain itself, 0.3% in the last quarter, 0.5% for, I believe, 19, 20 EU countries at 0.5. They are outperforming Britain right now. An argument might be made for those who sit in the Nigel Farage camp that we'll actually do just fine with Brexit.
I'm sorry, was that question for me?
That was for you, Chris.
Well, I think actually, Britain is going to be in a very vulnerable position now. Its economy is doing okay, but it's not as strong as all that. And remember, it is still part of Europe, probably for the next 2 years. The question is, how's it going to function once it pulls completely out of that? It's going to be facing a united Europe that's not going to be very forgiving about the whole Brexit exercise, especially now that you've got Macron as president in France. It's going to be also facing a United States, which is much more protectionist than Obama's United States was. So I'm not sure how far that special relationship is going to go. I think people who look at Theresa May's position right now see it as one that's very weak, although she's strong against the fractured parties in Britain, and she will probably win big in the upcoming elections there. But I think she's going to have a real tough row to hoe trying to cut any kind of very strong bargain with the European Union at this point.
We're going to bring in Peter Baker to our conversation here, New York Times White House reporter, and as we look at the response coming out of the administration right now, we also have the statement, official statement from the White House, and it says here that we congratulate President-elect Macron and the people of France on their successful presidential election. We look forward to working with the new president and continuing our close cooperation with the French government. That comes from the White House. And then there's also the tweet that came from President Trump earlier as well. In that tweet, he also is consistent with the White House official statement, saying congratulations to Emmanuel Macron on his big win today as the next president of France. I look very much forward to working with him. Peter, is President Trump very excited to work with him?
That's a great question. What's striking about this press release and this tweet is how normal they are. This is what any president would normally say, no matter who won in an election of an allied country. And we're surprised because that's not the way President Trump has rolled, basically, since he became president. He's tended to be more blunt, more honest, more candid, sometimes very provocative. And this time he's chosen to be diplomatic and respectful. So, look, he knew coming into this that Macron was almost certainly going to win. He knew coming into this that meant he had to work with him. So he chose not to be, a bomb thrower on this day of an election, and we'll see whether that holds. But this is certainly not the result he would have preferred. He made very clear that Marine Le Pen was closer to his view on issues like migration, borders, and international terrorism. So this is, in some ways, obviously going to be seen as a setback for President Trump and the sort of nationalist populist wave that people had perceived rolling across international borders.
And that's really a head nod to the political platforms that President Trump has, and its theoretical sinking with Marine Le Pen on several levels here. But then there's also the practicality of this administration, of this White House.
Okay, thank you.
Peter, your thought on this. What does it mean for this White House in what's happening in France? How much does he need Emmanuel Macron?
Well, look, you know, he doesn't have a lot of close allies at this point in Europe. I mean, he's trying to build relationships with Theresa May, with Angela Merkel. He'll try now with Emmanuel Macron, but they are not philosophically in tune. So, you know, it's an interesting moment where, you know, you've got a president who is sort of on the outs with some of our leading allies. Now, he has made very clear in his 100 and some days in office that he makes diplomatic relations really about personality, really about personal interaction. And he has switched on a dime if he makes a personal connection with somebody, even if they're not on the same page. Look at what happened with Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. President Trump, of course, had been a big China basher for years, and as soon as the two of them spent some time together down in Mar-a-Lago, suddenly the tone was very different. So we'll see how the personal chemistry works between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump when the two of them get together. They'll probably see each other soon, I would imagine, either at the NATO summit or the G7 summit coming up later this month, when President Trump will make his first trip to Europe as president.
And with the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP deal pretty much gone at this moment, but still an important economic relationship that we have with France, exporting some $30 billion annually to France. And actually, it's in deficit to the amount that we import. But it's an important economic relationship here. And as we look forward to multiple bilaterals, if you will, this will be an important relationship to have.
No, of course it is, right. France is the 6th largest economy in the world. It's an important trading partner. It's an important security partner in the world as well. So, you know, there's no question that France is top on the radar screen when it comes to any administration in Washington. What happens on trade is a good question, because the EU has traditionally negotiated trade deals in collective. They don't do it individually. We haven't had individual bilateral trade agreements with some of these countries. So that's something that President Trump didn't seem to understand at first when he came into office. He said,
but what he wants to do.
But he wants to do it. You know, I'm not an expert on EU rules. I don't think that's something that they can do. So, you know, he's going to have to figure out whether he still wants to do something on trade with Europe in a broader sense, or whether, you know, because I don't think he can blow up the EU at this point, since obviously the voters of France have chosen not to.
Hey, Peter, what is Steve Bannon thinking, and what do you think he's saying right now?
Well, that's a good question. You know, he obviously is the president's chief strategist and has been a believer in blowing up the existing system, both here in the United States and in Europe. There had been some interest on the part of Breitbart, his former news agency, to set up European outfits to try to, like, stir up some of this nationalist and populist sentiment. But that obviously didn't succeed today. Having said that, you know, a 35% vote, if that's where Marine Le Pen ends up, is a pretty significant share of the vote, and still an important sign that there are a lot of discontent in Europe that may match some of the discontent that's here in the United States and that President Trump seems to represent.
Peter Baker, New York Times, White House reporter, thank you so much, my friend, for giving your perspective on the breaking news that we're following today coming out of France. Matt Bradley, Chris Dickey still with us, following these developments coming out of France at the moment. We're still waiting, I believe, for the president-elect to reach that location on the left-hand side of your screen, and that's the Louvre, and he's going to be addressing all of his supporters. The warm-up bands have been numerous and quite energetic on this very evening, as it's hitting on 10:15, 10:16. Live pictures coming and going for us there. Matt Bradley, what's the lens on the United States right now as they've been going through this election, and now, if you will, post-election, the way they're viewing the United States, viewing Donald Trump, the idea of Steve Bannon, which both of you have brought up in our conversations so far, and whether Donald Trump and this administration is really even registering to a great degree at this moment?
Well, if you're asking what the view from France is of the United States, I think it's the same as it's always been, which is just, you know, totally schizophrenic. I mean, the French love America and hate America so strongly, so much at the same time, and that probably won't change. You know, when I was in France several years ago, George Bush was president, and a lot of people here were asking me, you know, how is it that Americans could elect George Bush? How could you go into the Iraq War? Well, now when I'm here, people aren't saying that about Donald Trump anymore, because it's a little bit of that, you know, but for the grace of God, go we. That whole populist wave is creeping up, not just in France, but it's the same attitude in Britain. There isn't this same feeling of how could you have elected that kind of leader?
Yeah.
And I think that when it comes to the French perspective on the United States, that's going to be evolving very, very quickly. As Macron, obviously, he curried favor from Obama. That Obama endorsement, there wasn't just one, endorsement. There were really two. The Macron campaign asked President Obama to sort of create a staged phone call where President Obama called in and had a little videotaped phone call where Macron, just in his shirt sleeves, looked like he was just in the middle of something, took a phone call from President Obama, who wished him well. That was only a couple of weeks ago. And all of this just goes to show that the Macron campaign wouldn't have done that if they didn't think that was going to sell so incredibly well here, and then prevailed upon Obama once more 2 weeks later to endorse him again. I mean, there's a lot of love here and really a lot of hate for the Americans, and we're going to see that continue, especially with the spurned population who voted for Marine Le Pen. And don't forget that this hack that came out just a couple of days ago, that actually came out on 4chan, and that was popularized by right-wing, alt-right elements and Twitter people in America. A lot of the same people who were on 4chan boosting for Trump were the ones who were spreading around a lot of that hacked material. And so people here aren't going to forget that. That kind of intervention won't go lightly in terms of public opinion.
Chris Dickey, we have to go to break, but I want to quickly get your thoughts on this, on the very same topic, and that is, again, how do you think, because you spoke with so many French citizens that voted, what do you think their perspective going forward will be now on this Trump nationalist thematic?
Well, I think Matt and I agree on almost everything, but I think actually that the French look at Donald Trump and they think he's a complete flake. I think they have no confidence in him, but I'm sure that the wiser French hope, as Macron said, that he will be able to work, that the two presidents will be able to work together. Maybe Trump will get religion. He decided that NATO was obsolete one day and not obsolete the next. Maybe he'll embrace the idea of the European Union now that it's something that he's not going to be able to break apart.
All right, Chris Dickey, Matt Bradley, stand by. We're going to take a short break here at MSNBC following the breaking news this hour that a new president has been elected in France. 30 percentage point victory margin there. We'll have more going straight to the Louvre. Live pictures there as we do expect to see the new president-elect speaking very shortly ahead of a lot of great performances from both musicians and rap artists. Live here at MSNBC, breaking news this hour. It's 4:23 in the afternoon Eastern time in the United States, but it's 10:23 p.m. in the evening as the new president-elect, the president-elect of France, Emmanuel Macron, about to celebrate with all his supporters there in front of the Louvre. Some 670-odd pieces of glass on that beautiful pyramid. That's the entrance to the museum there. You couldn't ask for a better evening or picture. This is actually live, yes. And we are awaiting and watching for the motorcade of Emmanuel Macron to arrive there to see what he will be saying. We believe it has already arrived, and when he does make it to the microphone, we'll take us straight to France right after this. Continue to follow breaking news here at MSNBC. We're at the bottom of the hour, and if you're just joining us, the results that are in as you look at live pictures here coming out of the Louvre and the plaza in front of the museum, we expect the president-elect to be speaking very shortly, Emmanuel Macron, who within the last 2 hours was declared the president-elect. 65 to 35%. Marine Le Pen, the far-right candidate in this runoff, not able to even meet what was the consensus polling, which was about 25, 26% in terms of a gap. She instead losing by some 30 percentage points. Now the question is what will happen next and how will Emmanuel Macron be able to govern? And the parliamentary elections upcoming there in France, an important part of that duality that is needed to govern in the French Republic. Joining us right now, Shelby Holliday, Wall Street Journal senior video reporter, Gabe De Benedetti, Politico reporter. Thank you both for being here. Shelby, you're on set with us here. The thought here about where he will go with the economy. The numbers look good, at least when you lumped all of 19, I should say, minus Britain. European countries, they're looking really good. 0.5%, if you will, looking good compared to Britain by itself at 0.3%. What this might mean going forward for economic indicators. I was just looking at how the markets might open, not only in Asia, but also in Europe in the upcoming hours, because we're just about to hit midnight there in Paris.
Right.
It's looking good. The market's liking the outcome of what happened there in France.
Absolutely. The market had major jitters about the French election. Even just a week ago, people were really worried that if Marine Le Pen won, she would withdraw from the European Union, and that would signal the end of the European Union as we know it, because French is a pinnacle of that of the EU. So the market was really worried that Europe would be a mess. Europe being a mess means tough times here in the U.S. Our economies are tied together so much. And Macron winning gives a lot of people confidence, not just because he will stay in the EU, he's pro-European, but he's also an investment banker. He's pro-business, he wants growth, and that allows America to achieve a lot of its economic goals, just purely because of the stability and because people know now that we can count on the EU being intact.
And Gabe, if it matters that you're part of the billionaire boys club, then this President Trump and this President-elect Macron should get along well together, at least based on those that President Trump seems to have a good bedside manner with so far, not only within his own cabinet, but those that he has dealt with internationally.
Purely in terms of economic conversations, there's reason to believe they'll be able to at least begin to speak the same language. So there is that hope among a lot of people that at least when it comes to the business side of things, they will be, at least able to see eye to eye. Obviously, that may not necessarily be the case in terms of their conceptions of international relations. But as you have noted, the markets are seeming to like the way that this is going, mostly because it is an indicator that, there's not going to be a lot of global instability moving forward, or at least not in the Eurozone. And that's something that a lot of folks here back in the States, but especially in Europe, have been very nervous about recently, as it looked like Le Pen was going to overperform. Obviously, that did not happen today.
Yeah, and one of the questions, Gabe, is with the U.S. President Trump, not a fan of multilateral agreements. TTIP was what I was talking about earlier in this hour. The transatlantic, again, trade deal that is dead on arrival for President Trump as he attempts to put together bilaterals with many countries around the world. He's going to face, certainly, not only because of agreements made in the past or because of the way that structures do work right now with the European Union, the Economic Union, that he won't be able to necessarily deliver on what he'd like to do when it comes to bilateral trade agreements. France, a part of this conversation, as I was mentioning earlier, with some $30 billion of trade, export, excuse me, from the U.S. to France.
Oh, that's right. There's no reason to believe now that France would be moving towards leaving the European Union, so that's going to make that conversation a little bit more difficult for President Trump. But of course, he's going to be able to make his nationalist argument in a number of different ways and focusing on a number of different countries. But the reality is that now, no, he's not going to likely be able to sit down with Macron and say, we're going to have bilateral trade conversations. At least that's not the expectation, according to people that I've talked to. Obviously, what President Trump has been doing is running a rather unorthodox trade, but also international way of doing things. So perhaps that could change. But what we've seen today, in Europe at least, is an indication that the folks in France are not willing to look for a new kind of trade regime, at least not in the short run.
And what we understand here, Shelby, is that Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, has called Emmanuel Macron to congratulate him, to reaffirm the ideals that they both share in the EU, in the currency, that they will work together for this open market that Angela Merkel now appears to be one of the major voices of. And so now the question is, can he work well with his other fellow lead European leaders?
Can Macron work well? Yes, that's a big question, but these two countries are so large, their economy is so big, that they're seen as the glue holding the European Union together. So investors, at least, will find it very encouraging that Merkel and Macron have spoken, that they seem to be off on good terms. The rest of the EU there's more uncertainty, but voters have rejected far-right candidates over the past few weeks in Austria and in the Netherlands, here in France. It has interesting implications here for the U.S. Donald Trump, I was speaking to a market strategist leading up to Trump's first 100 days. We were talking about all the unconventional things Trump had done. Right. However, on the other hand, this market strategist was surprised that Trump had commented on Europe and had seemed to encourage these nationalist movements, whether it's Brexit or he didn't outright endorse Le Pen, but liked the idea that these countries were becoming French first or British first, just as he has tried to take America as America first. That, you know, breaking off from the EU, though, would have negative consequences for their economies and for our economy. And I would also add one more thing. This market strategist thinks
as we watch
Donald
Emmanuel
Trump
Macron now approach the stage. But keep on going, Shelby, for a second.
Donald Trump here in the U.S. has given Europeans something to push back on once again, and it makes them want to be more European. And he said he predicted that you would see Macron win the French election because of that.
All right, Shelby, thank you so much, as well as Gabe. Stay with me if you can, along with Matt Bradley and Chris Dickey. A long and ceremonial, well-filmed, well-watched, some with light, some without, but the new president-elect there in France, Emmanuel Macron, walking towards the microphones in front of what appears to be hundreds, if not thousands, of supporters of his campaign. And what a night it is, a Sunday, 10:30 in the evening, with many performers, the warm-up acts, if you will, to the celebration, as Emmanuel Macron now takes to the microphone. He did have a victory speech earlier where he was commenting on his opponent, Marine Le Pen, and that he addresses and he sees and he appreciates their anger is the word he used with the system. He also appreciated why the voters supported Marine Le Pen and also said, I will address your needs. But overall, being, if you will, and when you look at the translation, his message was of uniting, of being that individual that will now get to work. And as has been noted, the next major issue, major benchmark to watch for this president when he starts in the coming weeks will be how will the parliamentary elections fare out. Just like it is in the United States. If he is to govern successfully, he will need Parliament to be behind his major legislative moves and his platform going forward. So we'll be watching that closely when it does happen on the lead-up coming to June, but a long walk here for Emmanuel Macron, and where that microphone is, we don't know. No, we do know, actually. It's right in front of, which you see the tip of the entranceway to the Louvre, that magnificent entryway, and that is where the stage is and where the performers have been throughout the evening, immediately and before the announcement was made in the 2 p.m. Eastern hour, where the French Interior Ministry, if you will, the equivalent thereof, did release the results very quickly after the polls closed. And we got that reporting from our Matt Bradley and Chris Dickey, MSNBC contributor, world editor for the Daily Beast, on what was happening. And then began the concession speech about 15 minutes after the polls closed. Then within the hour, Emmanuel Macron coming out with what he hoped to be a uniting speech, and then he took a long drive to this location where the party was already started, and now all of these onlookers, as they quieted for at least the last 10 minutes, waiting for their candidate to talk to them. And the question might be is, what will be the thematics that he will now lay out as he begins that long journey of being the new president of France at 39 years old, the youngest in the history of the French Republic, and no better a place, no better a background to now address and begin what is his young presidency for this young president. Let's just stop and listen.
Merci, mes amis.
Thank you, my friends.
Merci à vous.
Thank you.
D'être là ce soir.
Thank you for being here tonight.
Vous êtes des dizaines de milliers.
You are tens of
Et je ne vois que
thousands,
quelques visages.
and I only see some faces.
Merci.
Thank you.
Merci d'être là.
Thank you for being here.
De vous être battus.
Thank you for having fought with courage and benevolence for so many months.
Parce que oui, ce soir,
Because yes, this evening,
vous l'avez emporté.
you have won.
L'a emporté.
France has won.
Ce que nous avons fait
What we have managed
depuis tant et tant de mois
since so many months
n'a ni précédent.
does not
Ni
have a
équivalent.
precedent or an equivalent.
Tout le monde nous disait
Everybody
que
was
c'était
telling us
impossible.
that it would be impossible,
Mais ils ne connaissaient pas la France.
but they didn't know France.
Merci
Thank you.
de votre confiance.
Thank you for your trust.
Merci du temps que vous
Thank
avez
you
donné.
for the
Merci
time
de
you have
votre
given.
engagement.
Thank you for your
À toutes et
engagement to all of you.
Merci
Thank you
des
to
risques
all of you.
pris
Thank
par
you for the
certains.
risks you took for some of
Je
you.
le sais.
I know it.
Cette confiance,
This
elle
trust
m'oblige.
obliges me.
Et j'en suis désormais
And I am
le
from now
dépositaire.
on the depository.
Ne pas vous décevoir.
I cannot deceive you.
À la hauteur de celle-ci.
I need to be at the height of your trust
Durant les 5 années
and
qui
bring
viennent,
for the 5
l'élan
coming
qui est le
years
vôtre,
the
l'élan que vous
impulse which is
représentez.
yours, what you represent.
Je veux aussi ce soir
I also wish tonight
avoir un mot
to have a word
pour les Français
for
qui ont
the
voté
French who
pour moi,
voted for me
sans avoir nos idées.
without having our ideas, without
Vous vous
sharing
êtes
our
engagés.
ideas. You engaged
Et je
yourselves.
sais
And I
qu'il
know
ne s'agit pas là d'un blanc-seing.
that it was not
Je
easy.
veux avoir un mot
I
pour
wish
les
to have a
Français qui ont
word
voté
for the French
simplement
who
pour
voted
défendre
simply
la
to
République.
defend the Republic.
Face à l'extrémisme,
In the face of
sais nos
extremism,
désaccords.
I know our
Je les
disagreements,
respecterai.
and I will respect them.
mais je serai fidèle
But I will be loyal
à cet engagement pris.
to the engagement I have
protégerai
taken.
la
I
République.
will protect the Republic.
Et je veux enfin
And
avoir un mot
I also wish to have a
qui ont
word
voté aujourd'hui
for those who
pour Madame Le
voted
Pen.
today for Miss Le Pen.
Ne les sifflez pas.
Don't boo them.
Ils ont exprimé.
They expressed
aujourd'hui
They expressed today
une colère,
an anger,
un désarroi,
a disappointment,
parfois des convictions.
sometimes convictions.
Je les respecte.
I respect them.
Mais je ferai tout
But I will do everything
durant les 5 années qui
during
viennent
the coming 5
qu'il n'y ait
years
plus aucune raison
so that they do not
de voter
have a reason
pour les extrêmes.
to vote for extremists.
Ce soir,
Tonight,
il n'y a que les Françaises et les Français.
there are
le
only
peuple de
the French
France
citizens, the
réunis.
people of France
Et ce que vous
together.
représentez
And what you
ce soir
represent
ici au Louvre,
tonight here at the
c'est une
Louvre
ferveur,
is
un
an
enthousiasme,
optimism and
c'est l'énergie
enthusiasm.
du
It's
peuple
the
de
energy
France.
of the people of France.
Et ce lieu dans lequel
And
nous nous
this
retrouvons,
place in which we
dit
are
cela.
now says that.
Il est parcouru par notre histoire.
It is part of our
De l'ancien
history,
régime
from
à la
the
libération
former
de Paris,
regime to the liberation
de la
of
Révolution
Paris,
française,
from the French Revolution
l'audace de cette
to the
pyramide.
audacity of this pyramid.
C'est le lieu
This is the
de
place
tous les Français,
of all
de
the
toutes les
French,
de toutes les Françaises.
of all the French.
Ce lieu,
This place
c'est celui de la
is
France que le monde
the place
regarde.
of France
Car
that
ce
the
soir,
world
c'est
looks
l'Europe,
at.
c'est le monde qui nous regarde.
The world and Europe are looking at us.
L'Europe et le monde
Europe and the world
attendent que nous
expect
défendions partout
that we defend
l'esprit des
everywhere
Lumières,
the spirit
menacé
of
dans tant
enlightenment
d'endroits.
which is threatened in so many places. They expect that everywhere we defend freedom, that we protect the oppressed. They expect that we bring new hope, a new humanism for a safer world, for a world with freedom, of a world of growth, of more justice, of more ecology. They expect that we are finally ourselves. The task in front of us, my dear fellow citizens, is enormous, and it will start from tomorrow. It will impose the moralization of public life, the defense of the vitality of our democracy, the advancement of our economy, the construction of new protections in this world around us, and to give everyone a place through education, work, culture, to refound Europe and to ensure the security of all the French. This task in front of us is enormous, and it will impose the continuity and audacity. Yes, tonight we have won the right, a right that obliges us. You have chosen audacity, and that audacity, we will go forward with it, and every day we will carry it, because that's what the French expect from us, because that's what Europe and the world expect from us. They expect that again, France surprises them, that France is itself again, and that's what we will do. Our task is enormous, my friends, and it will require everybody's engagement. The engagement of our armies, of our police, of all our public services, your engagement, the engagement of everyone, elected organizations, civil society, unions, workers, civil workers, traders, farmers, students, retired people. Our task is enormous, and it will impose truth, the curse of truth, the one that during this campaign we carried, and that I will continue to carry on your behalf. Our task is enormous. It will impose the construction from tomorrow, a real majority, a strong majority. The majority for change. That is what the country expects, and that is what it deserves. That majority for change. That is what I expect from you in the following weeks, because I will need you.
Mes chers concitoyens,
my dear fellow citizens, you all who are here beside me since so many days and evening and nights, people of France, here together in the Louvre, we have the strength, we have the energy, we have the will, the one that has brought us here, that makes us what we are. That is what will lead our future. We will not give into fear. We will not give into division. We will not give into lies. We will not give into irony, egoism, decline or defeat. I know this enthusiasm you carry. I know what I owe you, and I know tonight what I need, what I owe my friends, my supporters, to my family, and my loved ones. It will not be easy every day. I know that. The task will be tough. I will tell you every time the truth. But your enthusiasm, your energy, your courage will hold me all the time. I will protect you from the threats. I will fight for you against lies, immobility, inefficacy in order to better everybody's lives. I will respect every one of you, your thoughts and what you defend. I will gather together and I will reconcile because I want the unity of our people and our country. And finally, my friends, I will serve you. I will serve you with modesty, with strength. I will serve you on behalf of our devise, freedom, equality, and fraternity. I will serve you in the loyalty of the trust that you have put on me. I will serve you with love. Long live the Republic. Long live France.
Emmanuel Macron, really not spending more than 10 minutes here in his victory speech there in front of his supporters at the Louvre, and with a very different tone than he had in his televised victory remarks, now in front of an adoring crowd as they get ready to finish out the evening on a Sunday there, May 7th, 2017. Historic for so many different reasons. An individual who is now the youngest president ever elected in that country's history, an individual who created his own party and then went on to win with great solidity, shall we say, at a 30 percentage point gap and margin of victory as his family joins him on stage there, and the night goes on as they will no doubt be celebrating in France for not only the Macron family but supporters of Emmanuel Macron. Matt Bradley, Chris Dickey still with us on this mat as it seems like he hit the right tone and that it seemed to sync well with his crowd that were out there at the Louvre. What's in front of him, though, as he was intimating, and as you've been telling us, is the parliamentary elections in June. What's the vision on that, Matt Bradley?
Well, Richard, his tone was as expansive as his campaign. It seems like he really wants to include everyone, and he made a very, very strong mention early on that he wants to include his detractors and his opponents, the people who supported Marine Le Pen, and he said very clearly that he understands them, he respects them, that they're people who have grievances, that they're complaining, and that he needs to reach out to them, and that he will do that. Now, we can assume that he will, because that was what he brought into this campaign. That was the signature message, that he was building this massive coalition, an expansive vision that would include kind of both the right and the left. Now, again, Richard, this was something I mentioned earlier. This was one of the faults of his predecessors. The current president, Francois Hollande, he tried to create too big of a tent and became unpopular, very unpopular, on both the left and the right. So we'll see. That could be very much a part of this challenge, how to build that tent but not make it too big.
Joel Benenson joins us, MSNBC political analyst and former senior advisor to Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. Joel, you have met Macron several times.
Yes.
Who is he?
Look, I think he's a young man with a vision. I think he set out on a path that is not a typical path, forming his own party, En Marche. I think even at the time I first learned of it, I was a little skeptical whether it could prevail. But he never wavered in that. I think when he's got a clarity of vision and he executes well against it. And I think if his business background helps in any way, it's that. I think he will be careful, pragmatic. I think he will not try to upset the apple cart when it comes to economic reforms. I think, there's been a lot of controversy about getting rid of the 35-hour work week in France, businesses not being open on Sunday. I think he will move slowly, carefully. I think he will forge a consensus, and he will try to govern the way he spoke tonight and always put the future of France front and center.
And we saw a couple of those gears that he has in terms of his style, his personal style specifically. Let's bring in Alan Lichtman, presidential historian. Joel and I were talking as we were listening to Macron and his victory speech here, Alan, and we're saying, who in history in France of their presidents does he remind one of? Who does Macron remind you of?
Of French presidents or
Yes.
American presidents?
French presidents, and if you've got one in terms of U.S. presidents, throw it in, Alan.
Well, I think in terms of American presidents, I'm not all up on French presidents. The one he reminds me of is Dwight Eisenhower, very much of a centrist kind of president, a president. He was not young, he was old, but who struck many of the same themes of bringing the nation together, uniting it, governing from the center. And he also recognized that he needed to deal with his opponents. But I do think Macron represents some very significant new and interesting challenges for the United States, which I'd like to talk about. I think there are important things here. First of all, we are going to be dealing with, and particularly President Trump will be, a much more united Europe than anyone expected after the Brexit vote. Secondly, this wave of right-wing nationalism that Trump seems to represent and favor is not the wave of the future in Europe. We see that in France. We saw that in Austria. We saw that in the Netherlands. Trump is going to have to deal with a very different Europe. And Macron represents a different vision, a vision of supporting democracy around the world, which is absolutely opposite of Trump's turning inward to America first. And finally, Macron has got to come to grips with that Russian intervention that tried to defeat him, which is going to reverberate right back here in the United States.
Which we will be watching. Joel Benenson, 30 seconds as we close out the hour here. How will he be seen in Europe, in that club of many world leaders? Angela Merkel, a key one there.
I think he's going to be seen as a very key player. I think you now have some stability. Theresa May's just called her election, and she looks pretty strong in the UK. Angela Merkel is very strong in Germany. I think he's going to be looked at as the galvanizing force. He is young. He is dynamic. He is calling people to action, the whole theme of En Marche. I think he will become a very key player very quickly.
All right. Joel Benenson, Alan Lichtman, thank you so much. The Point with Ari Melber is next. We stay on top of this breaking story.